Step into dual screen. Yeah, you're the host now. All right, well, thanks everybody. Well, today I'll be presenting our study, Neurologic Physiology of Hormonal Therapy. It's abbreviated Neupart. It's a multi-center product feasibility study, and it builds on some of the work that's been completed here at LHSC, and I'm doing this on behalf of Tennille Goffin, who unfortunately could not join us today. She's still in clinic. She just texted me, but maybe she'll log in a little bit later. So the outline for today's talk is we'll go over a bit of a background of how we arrived at doing this study. We'll discuss the study aims, study interventions, study protocol, and study team roles. So we'll start with the background. This particular study pertains to organ donation. And when we think about organ donation, there's really two types of organ donation. There's deceased organ donation and living donation. And within the deceased category, we have donation following neurologic determination of death and donation after circulatory death, and donation after MAID falls under that category. The cornerstone of organ donation in general, and especially of deceased organ donation, is trust. And in order to maintain stakeholder trust in deceased organ donation enterprise, there is a very specific rule that's known as the dead donor rule that stipulates that death determination must occur before organ retrieval, or that organ donation cannot be the cause of a donor's death. And this rule is intended to protect donors from potential harm. The way this rule is implemented in clinical practice is a little bit different for NDD and DCD. So when we think about NDD, in neurologic determination of death, also known as brain death, this determination involves confirming irreversible cessation of brain function using minimum clinical criteria that include neurologic clinical exam and, when required, ancillary neurophysiologic testing. In addition to enabling deceased donation, confirming irreversible cessation of brain function ensures that NDD donors are protected from experiencing harm during organ recovery. However, given that NDD is rare, it's less than 1% of all death, donation after circulatory determination of death, otherwise known as DCD, was introduced to address organ shortage. In DCD, patients with poor prognosis who are not brain dead and consent to organ donation undergo planned withdrawal of life-sustaining measures, otherwise known as WLSM, and they progress to circulatory arrest. Death determination occurs following mandatory observation period after circulatory arrest, which is about 5 minutes in most jurisdictions. And the reason we have this 5-minute observation period is to confirm that cessation of circulation is final and permanent. The big difference between obviously DCD and NDD, as you can see in this figure, is that while in NDD organs are supported by are provided with oxygen and blood because the circulatory respiratory support are maintained. In DCD, following removal of life-sustaining therapies, there's a period of ischemia and hypoxia, and if that lasts too long, then organs can get irreversibly injured. Now, the main difference also between NDD and DCD, in NDD, we confirm cessation of brain function using those clinical tests and when needed, ancillary neurophysiologic testing. But in DCD, the cessation of brain function is assumed, but not explicitly confirmed to occur at the same time or shortly after circulatory arrest. So this presents two problems. On the one hand, if brain function persists beyond circulatory arrest, if brain function persists beyond death determination, then there's potential that donors can experience harm during organ recovery. On the other hand, if cessation of brain function precedes circulatory determination of death, then determination of death may be unnecessarily delayed leading to organ damage as a result of ischemia and hypoxia. So establishing the temporal relationship or the time relationship between circulatory and brain arrest will help inform the appropriate timing for death determination in DCD and ensure that donors are protected from harm while maximizing the quantity and quality of donated organs. Now, Neupart emerged from Deepart, which in turn emerged from Deepart. So you may have heard of the Deepart study. LHSC was a participant in the study. This was a prospective observational study that was completed in 3 countries, 20 intensive care units, and enrolled 631 patients. The results of the study were recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine. In the Deepart study, patients who had planned withdrawal of life-sustaining measures had their vital signs, so ECG, arterial blood pressure, and pulse oximeter tracing, as well as oxygen saturation, recorded prospectively up until circulatory arrest and death determination, and for 30 minutes following circulatory arrest. And the reason to do that was to ensure that the 5-minute observation period following circulatory arrest was long enough to determine permanence of cessation of circulation. In other words, what Deepart study was looking for was whether any patients who progress to circulatory arrest have spontaneous resumption of circulation, and if they do, then when does that occur and for how long? As you can see there, the main results are summarized. There was resumption of cardiac activity in 5 of 631 patients clinically, and on a more detailed analysis of waveforms in 67 out of 480 patients. So in 14 patients, the waveform analysis revealed that following initial cessation of circulation, or flat line on the arterial line, there was resumption of circulation. Now, the longest duration from the initial circulatory arrest to resumption of circulation was 4 minutes and 20 seconds, which is less than the 5-minute waiting period. So the conclusion of that study was that the current standard 5-minute observation period is sufficient to confirm cessation of circulation and permanence of that cessation. So at LHSC, what we did is we asked whether we, in addition to monitoring cessation of circulation, can we also look at cessation of brain function? And so can we add neuromonitors? And essentially what we did is we screened 140 patients, 52 of who were eligible, 50 were enrolled, and 11 completed the full protocol, and 8 were included in the final analysis. And these patients all of them had EEG, a full set of EEG placed in their head during this period of withdrawal of life-sustaining measures, progressing to circulatory arrest, and for 30 minutes after circulatory arrest. And some also had TCD data. I don't have TCD data to show to you today, but I will share the summative results of the EEG study. What you can see here on the y-axis is the amplitude of the EEG signal, with the mean value across all patients depicted in solid line here. And the gray area represents essentially standard deviation around this average, and or the variance, I guess, around this average. And we can see here the 0 line represents circulatory arrest, so cessation of circulation. And going left to the left of 0 line, you can have 10 minutes before circulatory arrest, 20 minutes before circulatory arrest, and 30 minutes before circulatory arrest, and the same to the right-hand side here. What you can tell from this image is that EEG signal appears to stop before, on average, before cessation of circulation. And this occurred approximately 78.5 seconds before circulation cessation. What was interesting here is that EEG amplitude approached 0 before pulse pressure reached 0. So, which essentially tells us that there is probably a threshold pulse pressure, which is systolic minus diastolic blood pressure, at which brain function stops and donors are protected from harm. Now, obviously, this was only a single center study, and it was primarily a feasibility. Can this kind of research can even be completed? And so a lot of additional questions remain. So the question is, why do we now need a large multi-center study? So while Deepart results are reassuring, it was a small and single center study. There's difference between institutions and geographic locations. When we talk about geographic locations, you can compare Ontario and, let's say, Alberta. In terms of patterns and approaches to withdrawal of life-saving measures, some centers extubate early, some don't extubate. When we examine our own practices in the city, there's probably variation between providers at the bedside as well as across sites. And etiology of critical illness leading to withdrawal of life-saving measures can also affect the timing of cessation of circulation as well as cessation of brain function. So there you have, neurologic disease versus cardiovascular disease. All of these things can affect the relationship between cessation of brain activity and circulatory arrest. And so we need a multi-center study in order to obtain a representative cross-section of practice and enhance external validity of our results. So this brings me to the study aim and objectives of Neupart. And our main aim is to determine the feasibility at multiple sites of recording cerebral electrical activity, cerebral blood flow, and arterial pulse pressure during the dying process following withdrawal of life-saving measures. When I say cerebral electrical activity, I mean EEG, cerebral blood flow using transcranial Doppler, and arterial pulse pressures using the already in place indwelling catheters that patients already have in place. Our main aim here is to determine patient accrual at each site and identify challenges to accrual. And secondary objectives include things like completeness of waveform data, feasibility of transferring waveform data to the central site, which is going to be LHSC, and challenges to acquiring complete waveform data. And we will also explore the time difference between cessation of of brain activity and circulatory arrest. And this will become the primary outcome for the larger multi-center study. We currently have 5 sites. So we have LHSC, Vic, and UH. We will be starting with the University Hospital, and we'll probably be rolling this out to Victorian Hospital. We also have our collaborators in Calgary, Ottawa, Kingston, and Montreal at the CHUM, who will be participating in this trial. So this slide summarizes the study in terms of a PICO question. You can see we'll be enrolling adult patients who undergo planned withdrawal of life-saving measures in the ICU, with the expectation that death will ensue within the 24 hours. The intervention here will be addition of up to 2 of the following 4 neuromonitoring modalities: EEG, TCD at all sites, and at LHSC only, we'll also be testing brainstem activity using evoked potential, as well as latent cognition using something called event-related potentials. And I've already gone over the primary and secondary outcomes in the previous slide they just summarized here again. Our inclusion and exclusion criteria as follows. We're going to be including patients who are 18 years or older, have planned withdrawal of life-saving measures. The attending physician anticipates that patients will die within 24 hours of withdrawal of life-saving measures, and the patient must have an indwelling arterial cannula for monitoring blood pressure. We'll exclude patients who have progressed to brain death, or there is a plan for neurologic determination of death. Or patients who have injuries that anatomically preclude the use of neurologic monitoring. In terms of study interventions, this slide summarizes the study interventions that we will use. The primary, across all sites, and the primary thing that we'll focus on initially will be the use of video EEG. And the video component here is primarily used for, and actually not primarily, only used for to detect artifacts that is not coming from the cortex. So if the patient is moved, or if the family touches the patient's head, we'll be able to exclude that part of the data from our analysis. The video will be anonymized and will be deleted following the initial analysis of data. The transcranial Doppler, some of you may have seen, is a harness that goes around the patient's head and there's two probes that are held in place. And we usually put EEG leads on first, followed by a TCD. So this is what this usual setup will look like in the ICU room here in the middle. In some patients at LHSC only, we will be assessing brain auditory evoked potential and somatosensory evoked potentials. This will occur in a small subset of patients, and this is what it will look like essentially. And we'll not use more than 2 monitors per patient as per our RAB approved protocol. All right, so this brings me to the study protocol. So the way the study is going to work is this is the study timeline. You can see we'll be initially placing neuromonitors prior to initiation of withdrawal standing measures. The research team and techs will apply neuromonitors, which takes about 30 minutes to do. We're not going to apply more than 2 monitors per patient. Usually it'll be EEG or brain auditory evoked potentials or somatosensory evoked potentials first, followed by TCD, because the TCD has that harness that goes on the head. And then we'll start the recording, acquire about 10 minutes of baseline data, and then the research team will exit the room. The family will then be invited back in, and when the family is ready, the clinical team will initiate withdrawal standing measures using standard hospital process. We're not going to alter any practice here. The nurse can place the bedside monitor in comfort mode to silence the alarms. And the clinical team will not see neuromonitors, will turn the screens away, so you don't need to interpret the clinical neuromonitors. The one ask we have is that when death occurs and a patient is pronounced dead, do not turn off or disconnect monitors. Please leave them in place for up to 30 minutes after circulatory arrest, at which point the study team will come and remove the monitors. And this includes the bedside monitor. This is true unless the patient is a DCD donor, in which case the neuromonitors, as well as all other monitors, will be removed after the 5 minutes hands-off period when the patient is ready to go to the operating room. As I mentioned previously, the recording will continue for 30 minutes after circulatory arrest and up to 5 minutes in DCD donors to capture cessation of all signals. And once the recording is complete, the monitors will be removed. In terms of study teams and roles, I've broken some of the tasks here. So screening and consenting will be done by Tracy and Natasha. One thing to note here is if you have a patient for whom there is a plan to either propose withdrawal of life-saving measures, or there's a plan for withdrawal of life-saving measures coming up, please let Tracy and Natasha know. They will be also checking with you, and they will be checking with the charge nurses to make sure that we capture patients who are eligible for the study. You can see that application neuromonitors and the recording will be done by Venkat, who's in the call. He's one of our postdoctoral fellows. Hello, Venkat. Jeff and Loretta, as well as our EEG and TCD techs. Clinical data entry will be done by Courtney, who is our data entry specialist, and data analysis will be done by the whole team here, including Derek, Tennille, and myself. And that's all I had to say. I'd like to thank, obviously, our study sites. You can see them listed there, and the following collaborators, as well as the following sources of funding. We have funding from CHR, MOSO, and the New Frontiers in Research Grant. And this is a Canadian Cricket Trials Group and CDTRP, which is Canadian Donation Transplantation Research Program project. So we're very thankful for their support. And I'll stop there.